It's very good to speak to you both today. I'm wondering, for those who are watching at home who might be unfamiliar with this area that we're going to be discussing, could you maybe explain a little bit about your work and the significance of safeguarding and advocacy for adults, particularly vulnerable adults in Ireland?
Our main aim is to promote the safeguarding of vulnerable adults from all forms of abuse, and that includes abuse by persons, organisations and institutions. And we wish to promote a national framework to deal with abuse. At present, we don't have any adult safeguarding legislation in Ireland. We have safeguarding legislation for children, but once a person reaches the age of 18, we don't have any legal framework to deal with issues that arise to protect them.
And SAGE Advocacy is the National Advocacy Service for older people. We are also supporting healthcare patients and adult and vulnerable circumstances in situations where other services are not available to intervene. And since November 2023, we have been asked by the Department of Education to provide advocacy and support to survivors of institutional abuse. And our mission is to protect, promote and safeguard the rights and dignity of older people, vulnerable adults and healthcare patients through provision of individual and systemic advocacy.
So typically I think when people think about safeguarding of vulnerable individuals, they think of children primarily, and of course that's critically important. But I think there is a tendency, at least on my part, to forget that there are many adults who are in compromised positions who need this sort of support. What are the sorts of dangers and challenges that older people or people with intellectual disabilities face currently in Ireland, in your experience?
I think the top three issues that the top three reasons for why referrals are sent to our service are financial, legal and access to services, and in some cases planning ahead. So in terms of finances, you're looking at access to their own money. Sometimes you'd be amazed how many older people do not get to use their own funds for a variety of reasons. Safeguarding of finances, access to entitlements, property, affairs, wills.
Do you think that there is a concerted effort on the part of some groups to target older people because they appreciate that they're probably going to be easier targets for things like scams and financial, when it comes to organised crime, let's say? I know we've seen this in other jurisdictions around the world, that older people are particularly susceptible to these sorts of things, and so they make prime victims, I suppose, for a group with malicious intent. Have we seen anything like that?
We did a survey again, Safeguarding Ireland, a Red C poll, for the simple reason that everybody's highlighting the frauds and scams and not highlighting financial abuse. And of course, our survey revealed that high 80% plus the financial abuse was carried out by a person known to them. A scam and fraud is usually by a person unknown. And in terms of the age profiles, actually, it wasn't the older people. It does happen. Of course, an advantage is taken, there's no doubt about it, of older people. But it's financial abuse, mainly, not frauds and scams. So the frauds and scams happen across the board, and really to the younger age group as well, you know, in a higher proportion.
So when it comes to coercive control and maybe an older individual who, as you say, they might have diminished capacity and struggle to protect themselves from abuse when it comes to financial issues, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how prevalent that is as a problem and how that manifests when it comes to, you know, the management of an older person's finances, or somebody who's vulnerable and unable to advocate for their own interests.
In terms of allegations of abuse in general, I think financial abuse allegations are our highest numbers. We have different type of abuse allegations as well that we're dealing with. And I think the best way to address, like, access to independent advocacy should be key. Every person that is found to be in difficulty should have access to an independent advocate. When a problem occurs, when abuse occurs, there is an imbalance of power between the abuser or the alleged abuser and the victim. And independent advocacy is meant to bridge that gap and strengthen the voice of the person in addressing that particular imbalance.
So here we'd be talking about potentially a third party spending the money on an older person without their consent or knowledge or understanding necessarily. And
yes, and we're seeing this. So let's say a typical scenario would be a person who becomes unwell, goes in hospitals. Depending on their issue, could be staying a long time in hospital. So already during that time, we have seen the situation happen where a third party begins to collect the pension, and then the patient never gets to see their money. At the point of transfer, let's say after many months, at the point of transfer from the hospital to a nursing home, let's say if they decide to go to a nursing home, at that point, sometimes a transitional care funding option is put in place to allow for the patient, in collaboration with a social worker or an advocate or their relatives, to complete the Fair Deal Forum. They have around 10 weeks to complete that process. So in many occasions, we find out that there are patients at that point where we have to support them to get access to their banking information in order to complete the Fair Deal assessment. And we see there are issues with in the statements. You can see that funds have been misappropriated by third party. We have seen examples, let's say, between minor sums being taken regularly from accounts to up to 720,000, I think is one of the highest amounts we've come across over a period of time, and could be, online banking is one of the sources again where a person might require support to use online banking or because they cannot get to a bank, and then abuse could happen as well. So there are different situations, and our intervention depends very much on the ability of the person, their own circles of support and their wishes, and collaboration with other professionals. So dealing with abuse is not the matter for one person only. It's everyone's responsibility in a way, and a multidisciplinary approach to safeguarding is the best way, where you'll have social workers, advocates, the medical team if necessary for various reasons, and then could be policing skills as well, because all these incidents of abuse get reported to HICRA, to the guards, and there's processes in place for that.
The Law Reform Commission makes some recommendations for the updating of regulations for financial service providers, again to have systems in place to prevent abuse.
So this would be potentially regulations on banks, let's say, that if a person is in a compromised position, there are stricter rules around how the money can be used?
Yes, and at the moment, for example, one of the big issues is GDPR, as mentioned. You can't share information, you can't share data, whatever. Again, as part of the Law Reform Commission's recommendations is the whole question of sharing data as appropriate, as a safeguarding tool when necessary and limited, in accordance with the legislation, of course. And indeed, both Safeguarding Ireland and Sage Advocacy have been in consultation with the Data Protection Commission over the last number of years to produce a guidance document, because everybody says, I can't share, I need the consent of the person. If a person lacks capacity, they can't. But consent is only one of 6 options under the regulations. There are other options, including to safeguard the vital interests of a person, or for safeguarding. Again, banks will have vulnerable customers' accounts and things like that. Some banks are very good at understanding that. Other banks are not. They're demanding actually all sorts of medical reports and whatever of a person of capacity, whereas they should be supporting the person and indeed dealing with the person who has formally appointed somebody to support and assist them. So we've a long way to go in terms of our practices and culture. So there's learning to be done by society. There's learning to be done by anybody that's interacting with those people. And again, coming back to the Law Reform Commission's report, it actually sets out the duties of organisations and people interacting with others. And again, I would make the point that the people that are subject to abuse are a wide cohort. It's not just older people. It's not just a person with a disability. A person can be in a very bad place at times. They may have suffered a bereavement, they may be ill or whatever, and they find themselves in a difficulty, and they're relying on, is that a trusted person that they are actually relying on, you know, to assist and support them. But we have no legal framework at the moment for doing that, and that's where the big gap is.
Vulnerable customer units. So certain banking institutions created these vulnerable customer units, and our advocates have managed in many, many cases to collaborate very well with the representatives of vulnerable customer units in addressing various banking issues that would have happened over the last few years. I think we've been engaging with the fraud unit as well, and we are supporting our clients to give statements to Gardaís as well.
I heard in an article that there have been instances of people who are convicted sex offenders who were found to be abusing people in nursing homes who were then moved on to subsequent facilities, or allegations of things like that happening. I again, granted, I'm sure that's not widespread or common, but have you encountered instances like that?
I think the issue of sexual abuse allegation is very rarely happens. So that does not take away from the cases that do happen, because when it happens, it is very serious and it has considerable implications to all parties involved. We know that there would have been cases where, let's say, clients would have been convicted in the past for offences of this kind, and older age required admissions to nursing homes. So it's a very difficult issue, as you can appreciate, and it requires a multidisciplinary approach in terms of risk management, because those people do require care, and the information, as Patricia was saying earlier, it's all about sharing the relevant information so that the risk assessments are done in the right way, and it's an absolute duty of care towards the other residents that they are not exposed unnecessarily to risk like that. So
these would be individuals who are residents within the care home who might have
would have been convicted in the past, or it could be like allegations of abuse, peer-to-peer abuse, or resident to resident, but that's not. A lot of them remain just allegations. They're very difficult to substantiate because, as you can appreciate, the majority of cases are unwitnessed in allegations that are being made. It's a more complex issue requiring a lot of input from different sources, and the most important thing is data sharing and risk management in all that, because every risk can be managed at the end of the day. But it's more about investing in prevention, investing in proper risk management, and putting in place the necessary resources for everything that it takes to contain a problem.
There are other pieces of legislation in the safeguarding context that we think we've done extremely well on. For example, coercive control. And everybody says we have now an offence of coercive control. But that is very limited. It is limited to people who coercively control or perpetrate control over a person who has or was in an intimate relationship. But it doesn't extend to, say, an older person being controlled by a younger family member, or even non-family member, a carer, a neighbour, whoever. So again, we need up-to-date legislation to recognise that is a very wide offence. So when you're talking about financial abuse, or you're talking about making decisions on behalf of somebody who may be old or frail, or maybe whose capacity is challenged, that's all about control and power. So what we need safeguarding legislation for is to ensure that people are empowered, supported and helped if they need that support and help at the level they require it. So that's why we need an adult safeguarding authority. We need a body that actually can lead and coordinate safeguarding practices and make sure we have consistent safeguarding practices across all services. And of course, safeguarding is not limited to health and social care. It's across the board. So many organisations, you will find financial abuse in clubs or organisations or whatever. You'll find coercive control in many relationships or whatever. But we need that legal framework.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights into this incredibly important issue, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.